So, our first panel of Explore 2020 is on intelligent virtual sales, a data driven approach to winning customers and keeping them happy. And that's led by Donald Tucker. So, Donald is our collaboration domain lead for Cisco Investments in Corporate Development. Recently, he's led acquisitions into companies like CloudCherry and Voicea, both of which actually were Cisco Investments portfolio companies previously. So, Donald invests in a wide range of companies. But recently, he's been focusing on companies who specialize in AI and natural language understanding, empowering the frontline worker, and understanding the customer journey. Earlier in Donald's career, and actually prior to him becoming a tech investor, he was actually a natural resource investor. So he traveled all over the globe to some of the most remote areas, including the Arctic Canada, the deserts of Ethiopia, and the Amazon in Brazil, among others. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Donald.
Thanks again for joining us at Explore 2020. I'm Don Tucker. I'm your moderator for today. This is the panel on intelligent virtual sales, a data-driven approach to winning customers and keeping them happy. At Cisco Investments, one of the themes that we've been investing around is the change or the disruption that's happening around the customer journey. That includes sales, it includes marketing, customer support, adoption, and customer success. And with me today, I couldn't be more thrilled to have Gong and Whatfix, two leading Cisco portfolio companies, to talk about revenue intelligence and contextual onboarding and how that can help your sales and support teams excel at great customer experience from the first conversation to product adoption. To start, let's introduce two of our guests here that we have with us. I'm going to start with Gong and Ryan Longfield. Ryan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to Gong?
Yeah, hey everyone, Ryan Longfield. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Gong. I've been at the company for just under 2 years. And before this, I was helping scale the sales organization at LinkedIn for about 10 years prior.
Great. And also with us, we have Vispi Daver from Whatfix. Vispi, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us how you came to the company?
Thanks, Donald, and thanks to Cisco and Cisco Investments, and hi, everyone. My name is Vispi Daver, and I lead our global sales at Whatfix. I've been at the company for about 2.5 years. Before that, I was an angel investor in the company, and I liked it so much that I jumped on board full-time. And prior to that, I've been a venture capital investor and at large software technology companies in product management and business development.
Great. Well, thank you both for joining us today. And the good thing for me is I like both of you so much. I wouldn't be able to choose one to jump to, even though I'm an investor in both. So Ryan, I'm going to start with you. In terms of Gong and the pain point that really the company was set out to solve, what is that pain point that's in the marketplace? And can you talk a little bit about what your customers today are running into and why they seek a solution similar to Gong in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the very baseline, it's a very simple thing. We need a far better understanding as to what's really going on in our frontline conversations. There is an amazing amount of information that is happening every day as our reps talk to our market and our market talks back to our reps. And that flow of information that's going back and forth can be captured and it can be understood, and then it can deliver insights back to your organization about anything related to your go-to-market strategy. So whether it be understanding your market and how it's being impacted by COVID, whether it's understanding what your best reps are doing that everybody else should be doing to outperform their number, or where there's risk in your customer base right now that's not being reflected in your CRM. Once you have the power of understanding what's really going on in those frontline conversations, it unlocks an incredible amount of intelligence across your organization to better drive revenue. And so our headline is revenue intelligence. That's what we do, is revenue intelligence by understanding what's really going on in the conversations.
I think one anecdote I've heard is, if you're a sales leader in an organization and you really want to hear calls, you're either sitting in and sitting behind that inside sales rep, or sitting next to them, or on the phone, and literally you're sitting there over their shoulder, which I'm sure makes that rep nervous, and you probably don't get the natural experience that you would. But is that what companies are doing today? If you're a sales leader of an inside sales team, Is that how you monitor, or does it just not happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think we've found coping mechanisms to work around not having a detailed understanding of what's really truly happening in those conversations. And so, I'll give you a couple of examples. How do you know right now where there's risk and opportunity in your open pipeline? Because there's no detailed understanding as to what's going on in those conversations without shadowing every single call that's going on in the organization. Well, you have really lengthy one-on-ones where you ask them a series of questions that they then tell you or put in their CRM. And it takes a crazy amount of time. Did you talk to a decision maker? Yes, I did. Did you schedule a next meeting? Yes, I did. What's the opportunity? Here it is. If you knew what was going on in your conversations, you would get to the impact moments of those conversations far faster. So that would be one example of like how it would fundamentally change the one-on-one. Another one is like, what's your competitive win rate? Most people don't know the answer to that question because it relies upon terrible CRM data of a rep going in and checking a box saying, yes, competitor number one was in this deal. Competitor number two is in this deal. And we all say garbage in, garbage out. Nobody really knows their competitive win rate with any kind of accuracy. Again, because we don't know specifics about what's going on in the conversation. And the final one that I'd mention is a classically elusive sales question. What are my best people doing that everybody else should be doing? Because there's no data set saying these best people are talking more about these things in these ways, then we rely upon anecdotes from our top managers and we say, which are good, right? Like you go to a manager and say, what are your best people doing? The problem is you ask 8 different managers, you're going to get 8 different responses. And so when you then turn to be a data-driven enabled sales organization, like having your enablement function rely upon data to bring you to the right answers about what you should be training your people on, you often don't know, or at least you don't have a great data set because you don't know what's going on in those frontline conversations. And so that's what Gong does in a nutshell. It's revenue intelligence. It's like turning the lights on in your organization, and you can apply that detailed understanding of what's going on truly in those sales conversations to answer a litany of questions that are related to your go-to-market strategy.
That's fantastic. I love that. I love that phrase, turning the lights on in your organization. I'm sure a lot of organizations would love to do that. Switching back over to Vispi. Vispi, I'm going to ask you the same question. So in terms of, Whatfix and what they were set out to do, you guys are focused on digital adoption. What is digital adoption? Where did that come from? What's the pain point that customers are seeing today that you're talking with that's making them search for a solution around digital adoption?
Yeah. When customers either purchase a software application or they build it themselves for end customers, those end users of those software applications, whether those are internal to the company or whether those are external, the average adoption of those software applications in the industry is between 15 to 25%. So what that means is you purchase your software or you build it for a certain number of users in a customer, and only 15 to 25% of those users actually use that software application. So digital adoption is a category that's defined as being a solution or a platform that enables more of your end users to be able to adopt the software they've either purchased or they built internally for their internal use. That's the overall definition. And that's the genesis of why we were created, which was to help to increase that adoption of the software that you're using internally at an organization.
And Vispi, is this software you mentioned internal, but it's also external software as well, right? So this could include rollouts of CRMs or HCM systems, for example. Is that correct?
That's right. There's 2 types of software at a very high level at any company. One is software that you're purchasing from external third parties. The most popular, as you mentioned, are CRM or HR or ERP finance. And the other is software that you're building to either use internally or to sell to your end customer. So Cisco, for an example, would have great case studies in all 3. Cisco would have purchased some CRM or HR, the software adoption of that. Cisco would have built a lot of software in your IT department for internal use. And then, of course, you've got the best engineers building software for your end customers. These could be software applications like a WebEx Teams or Cisco Contact Center. It could also be just the user interface for one of your security or networking products. All of those are applicable and ripe for digital adoption.
So it seems like across those different applications, there's going to be a number of different users of digital adoption. So you could be, if it's software that you are looking to sell to an external party, you're probably a product manager. If you're rolling out software into your own organization, you're probably a functional lead. So I imagine this spans a number of different personas inside of an organization. Is that a correct way to think about it?
It does. The first example you gave was very apt to a product company like Cisco, where you have product managers building product and they want to make sure that your customers adopt it. Another example could be your CRM operations or your HR operations or any application operations team that have purchased some software and they want to make sure that is successfully adopted. And then probably a connective tissue around all this are any groups internal at the company that's responsible for customer retention, training, onboarding. Those would all be applicable buyer personas as well.
So changing gears a little bit here, as I look at the backgrounds as we're all talking here, we're not live on the stage, but we're joining each other from different remote areas thanks to COVID-19. From our homes and Vispi, it looks like you live in the office there, but you're all by yourself, appropriately social distancing. But as you think about the change that COVID-19 has brought, it's really changed a lot of the ways that companies are operating. And I think particularly something that's near and dear to you, Ryan, is sales teams. And of course, you guys have always focused on inside sellers and helping inside sellers excel. But now suddenly you have field sales that are turning into really inside sales reps, maybe very skilled inside sales reps, but they're being forced to do their job from a phone or on a video conference. And so, wondered if you could share some of the best practices that you've seen from organizations that are making these changes and any suggestions you have for them as they go through this transition.
Yeah, I think the starting point is understanding that the world has changed in a way that is going to impact the way we do sales going forward. There's no doubt in my mind that we are not going to go back to the same environment that we were in before. And I think that the technologies that we're using to stay connected when we're geographically disconnected is at the center of this transformation that we're having right now as a society. And so I think, if you think about the sales world specifically, you have to first start with breaking down the various parties that have been dramatically impacted by this and feeling the impact for those subgroups. It's not a blanket statement. And so let me give you an example. If you have a classically field selling team, they're used to being on the road X amount of time, we'll call it 50% of the time. So they're on the phone quite a bit. They're probably using some level of web conferencing, but mostly the bang for their buck for their big meetings, they're sitting there in person. Maybe it's like, the version of on the golf course or at the steakhouse or whatever it is, but at the very least, you're in person having a meeting. Those people are now virtually selling. They're having to figure out how to be far more effective in a mechanism like this, where you're connecting with people either over phone, over email, or video conference. And so that's one group of like field sellers are going through a transition. If you think about the field managers, they're in a different version. They're actually oftentimes used to being outside of the office in that sense, right? That's very different than the inside seller managers. The inside seller managers are like, wait, what is going on? Like, I can't go over to the person's desk after their call, or I can't roll my chair around to plug into different lines that are going on at this time, right? So the inside selling managers are figuring out how to be remote, where the field selling managers are like, this is how I've managed forever. I'm used to doing this. And so, you got to break down the various parties and say, okay, they're all being affected different ways. Inside selling managers, inside reps, field managers, field reps, and each of them are being impacted in a slightly different way. But even that is a starting point to start thinking about, okay, like what's different there and how do I help them make that transition to be more effective? That's a great starting point.
And are there any best practices that you've seen as you've interacted with your customers that you can recommend to our audience here today?
So one of the things that we've proven through Gong data, so we have about 15 million sales conversations banked from all of our customers, and we run analysis against that to find out what's working and what's not. And so, we have a huge bank of data that we rely upon. We find that for winning calls, winning deals, so calls where winning deals happen at the end of the cycle, there's on average at least 3 people on the buyer side participating in that meeting. This is versus 1 person on average for closed loss deals, right? So on average, 3 people are joining in the buying committee on the buyer side for 1 deals, and about 1 on the other side. And it's mirrored in a similar way in terms of who's involved on the seller side. And so we all know this, both internal collaboration to activate a buying committee in your organization, as well as multi-threading through the organization that you're selling into, massively impactful to the deal. Well, when you don't need to fly 4 people out from your organization, the sales leader can be on not just a couple of calls because they're traveling all over the country. They can be on the majority of calls, important calls, because they're not traveling all over the country. You don't have a sales engineer who's trying to travel with you. You have to make harder resource choices when they can't be there in person with you. And so now to get 4 people on a WebEx, that's really easy, both on the buyer side and on the selling side. And so it closes that gap, making it easier to collaborate internally as well as multi-thread into an account. And those have massive impacts on the close rates of deals. So I'm always shocked about this one, but I think it deserves saying because the statistics show that most sellers don't use their video these days when they're on sales calls. And I think especially for field sellers, there can be a slowness to adoption in terms of using the video. Feels awkward, like I don't know, I'm used to the phone, that kind of thing. But again, we sit on stockpiles of data, and successful deals show that the webcam is used 41% more often than unsuccessful deals. And I mean, I think when you stop and you think about it, it's extremely obvious as to why, right? Like you are most misunderstood when you're writing an email. You don't do that for anything complex or nuanced. You get on the phone. Well, how much better is it when you can see the person and feel the person? How much is it for keeping their attention when you're having a discovery call and they know that they can see you? And here's a commonly asked question in this one before I move on to the next one, which is, what if they don't reciprocate? Like what if you come on and they don't reciprocate? Well, I'll tell you, them seeing you animated and leaned in and asking questions and looking into your video, they're still going to leave the call feeling like they know you a lot better than a blind voice across a phone. So field sellers, this is like one of the skill sets, and inside sellers, I think, again, I can't believe I have to say this because it's so powerful and underutilized, but that's for sure the first one that I mentioned.
I think you're making every WebEx engineer smile when they hear that.
Unintentionally, I promise you, unintentionally.
One thing I wanted to dive into that you mentioned is the data, and that's one of the themes of our panel here. So I think you said, what was it, 15 million minutes of calls? Did I get that correct?
No, 15 million calls.
15 million calls. Okay, so well beyond 15 million minutes, which is fantastic. And so that's really the data that you guys are training your engine on, that Gong is getting better and better analyzing calls with. One of the things that has come up a lot more with working from home is thinking about security and privacy and confidentiality, right? Especially as folks are using more and more digital tools. How do you guys use the data from across your customers without compromising that data and privacy?
Yeah, I think there's 2 components of that. Data and security, we all know, incredibly important, especially when you're talking about conversation data. And so there's 2 components of it. There's the breadth of conversations across our entire customer base. How do we use the data there? And that one's really easy. We just anonymize everything that we're doing, right? So we have 15 million calls. Nobody knows where those calls are coming from. And we only pull data sets that can say statistics like the one I just shared, or others that are so anonymized that it's totally safe to use data in that regard. The harder one is when you get more specific to an account. And I think it's mostly about helping train your clients how to be safe with their data. So this is deploying your solution really well, telling them how to be GDPR compliant, when you're capturing certain portions of data. It's setting up the instance in a way where only the people who need to have access to that data have access to that data. And then, of course, for anybody selling anything that houses sensitive information, just being completely bulletproof in your technology and making sure that you go the highest levels of security. But yeah, I think there are really good ways to set up internal systems to make sure that you're compliant across the board to the highest levels of standards. And I think it's on the vendor side or the selling side to make sure that you're setting it up in a way that you're keeping everybody compliant.
Great. And Vispi, I'm going to go back to you. We've been leaving you out a little bit here. So, we talk about workforces moving more virtual and new tools being adopted, right? I can think of a couple new tools that I've personally tried and probably could have benefited from some of Whatfix like capabilities. But what can an organization do that's in the past relied on in-person training? In this virtual world to overcome those barriers and get that adoption beyond that 15 and 20% that maybe you were even relying on the in-person training to drive. How can you get it higher? What are some of the best practices that you can recommend?
Yeah, Gartner has a really good report when they launched digital adoption as a category. So it was prior to COVID. And they said on average, any employee at a company has to use and get proficient with 14 different software applications. So if that sounds far-fetched, just take this as an example. Let's say a new employee is joining the company as an example. They've been interacting with an HR applicant tracking system. When they join, they have to enter information in all their HR information in an HR information system. Then they're ordering their laptop, their peripherals, etc. That's in a IT service management system. Then depending on their function, they have a functional application like a sales application, performance management, you're back to HR, and so on. You can see how you easily add up to 14 on average. So I'd argue, and I can't wait for the research to come out post-COVID, but I'd argue, just like you anecdotally provided, Don, that this has increased. It's increased in a few ways. We certainly know certain applications like conferencing, collaboration have taken off and more usage around there. So that has increased from 14. So where Whatfix comes in and what we do as a digital adoption solution is we provide an overlay on top of these applications. And that overlay guides users to their everyday tasks and workflows. Those guidances could be in a few different flavors. They could be for onboarding a new user. Let's say you log in for the first time. Here's how you order your laptop or your phone, or you configure your HR system. It could be for existing users, their continuous training in there. Could be for customer support. All of these use cases are exacerbated in an environment where there's no one around you physically. In the first case, there's no classroom-based training to guide you through it. In the second case, there's no HR department or buddy system to help you undergo your tasks in a separate application. And then as you go on, this all gets increased in a remote work environment. So we found that there's more usage of our product in terms of a digital adoption layer. And to be honest, even in a non-remote training environment, the value of what they call learning in the flow of work, which is while you're using a software product, you're learning it as you're actually accomplishing a task. You're not learning about it all up front. And again, I don't want to confine to learning, but it's also for customer retention. You get to see what your customers are doing on the application and look at it in a back-end analytics standpoint. I'll pause there.
Yeah, no, I think there's nothing more frustrating when you're trying to learn a new application. You want to get in, you want to get your hands on it, right? You don't want to sit there and per se read the manual for the first 5 hours, right? That you're getting onboarded. And so I think being able to do that in an application makes a huge difference, and being able to step through that much like a Whatfix allows. Um, how do you see a tool like Whatfix really drive digital adoption and reduce that timeline to digital transformation that we've all been talking about? Do you have any statistics or examples that you can share around that?
Yes, we do. So if you take both use cases, let's just pick one. An enterprise has purchased a new CRM or a new HR solution, and they want to implement it and launch it. So typically the metrics associated with that are how long does it take for the first set of users to go live? Then how long does it take for everyone to go live successfully? And we reduced that time meaningfully. It's been cut by as much as a third in some of our use cases. And that's just on the onboarding and implementation period. Now, when any application is live, the other great metric that we provide as quantifiable return on investment is the support tickets associated with that application reduce significantly. Let's take my earlier example. I'm a new employee. I've logged into my HR or service management application, and typically without a digital overlay or digital adoption platform like Whatfix, I'd search, how do I order my laptop? That would take me to a knowledge base. I'd read about it. I'd try and remember the 10 steps about how to do it, then come back in and try to do it. With Whatfix, we know you're a new employee. We will automatically, as soon as you log in to your email or your HR or your service management system, tell you, here's how to order a new laptop. And then we'll guide you through those 10 steps, step by step, interactively. So at the end of it, without necessarily having to memorize it, you have actually ordered your laptop or entered a lead in a CRM system or configured your Cisco security firewall, depending on what your use case is. So the idea is that when it's contextual, you need it just in time when you have to do the task, rather than a lot of training upfront. So that's one of the ways we've been able to inject ourselves in the learning sort of workflow for organizations.
Great. No, that makes a ton of sense. One department that you mentioned, and I'd be curious if you have any stats around this as well, is learning and development departments, wanting to augment employee experience, and so in terms of that use case, do you see that coming to the forefront as well as a tool like this supplementing a lot of what's offered in the L&D by L&D departments?
It is. Learning and development teams are typically tasked with training employees on how to use software that they purchased, or they're also tasked with training customers on software applications that they're using. In both cases, they're responsible for getting users onboarded as soon as possible. Again, that metric, how long it took and how successful it occurred. So very important to learning and development teams. They're often huge champions of ours moving forward. They're also responsible for continuously creating content associated with that software application. When there's any change associated with it or new features, etc., are released in there. But as the software continues to be used, customer success and customer retention comes in as well. When it's time to renew for any software that you've either sold or purchased, you're often looking at your usage. And we give a great dashboard to the C-suite saying, you've purchased this software for 10,000 users, you're actually deploying it for only 3,000 users, and here's how frequently or infrequently they're using it. So when it comes to customer retention, you also have good analytics at the back end telling you how many are using it and what they're doing exactly. So huge value starting with learning and development, onboarding and training, and continuing to customer success and advocacy.
And for those that are product owners, for example, as well, do you help them track NPS and CSAT scores as well? And have you seen a difference from those that have adopted a digital adoption platform versus those that haven't?
Yeah, so for product owners, it's actually very interesting. Even though it's a product is similar for product owners as well as for operations owners, the product owners have a different requirement. A big one for them is change management. So the products constantly change. There's a different user interface, a version has changed, and they want to make sure that whatever new features are constantly being released are alerted for the end users. So we have several types of overlays, one that can make sure that anything new crops up and is prominent, such that we make sure all the end users go through that new feature. And again, our backend analytics says, you release this new feature, you added a Whatfix overlay to publicize it, here's how many users now went through it. So change management has been a huge one for product managers. The other one, as you mentioned, has been around NPS and A/B testing. They want to see the analytics associated with different pages that they roll out and how much more or less successful a certain page layout is. So we can help with that as well, more around the analytics component of our solution. And then for product managers, another really big one, depending on the type of product, is compliance. So what happens is, based on your industry, pharmaceutical is a great example, compliance regulations are constantly changing. And you want to promote through internal messaging on the product itself what those changes are. So we could alert users immediately inside the product, informing them of those changes and the new ways of doing things in that product based on those changes that have occurred in the industry.
Yeah, what strikes me as interesting is it's a very horizontal tool, both across industry as well as a broad user base of personas inside inside an organization. Probably one of the broadest I've seen, and so there's a lot of folks that can really get value, both either as an end user. There's a number of folks obviously that get end value, but also as a owner of a digital adoption platform or a user deploying that in your organizations. When we were looking at this category and thinking about investment, one of the things that originally struck me was, well, this makes a lot of sense for platforms like a CRM or maybe an old ERP system, especially when they've been customized and they're hard to navigate. But the thing that's really surprised me as well is just seeing, even on modern SaaS, platforms with slick new UIs, how much you really see the digital adoption being used. So it's not just those difficult to use platforms. And I think a lot of what you talk about around um, product managers, driving to new features with constant releases and new features, wanting to test those and see how well they're doing, drive adoption towards those features, make their users aware of that. But that really struck me as kind of a turning point, I think, in our understanding of digital adoption and why we got so excited, because it's not just the old clunky software that needs this, right? It's even those modern SaaS properties. They have all these great hidden features, and not everybody finds them. And so you need that digital adoption to drive that.
Yeah, I think, Donald, it's as simple as you honed in on change management. But as humans, anything new, no matter how simple it is, if it doesn't look like the way we did it earlier, it requires change management and requires help and assistance and digital adoption. So a great example is just the whole category of collaboration and conferencing. And WebEx Teams, the product teams there, and WebEx Teams customers are a huge proponent for digital adoption for that reason. Not complex, but it's different from what was used before. And for that reason, we need that helping hand, that overlay in front of WebEx Teams to guide users through all the features in WebEx Teams and how they're different from how you had it in your prior solution.
Absolutely, it's amazing to me. Even in tech companies, that's true. People are resistant to change and new platforms, and you need to make it easy for them, right? Make that a barrier to adoption much lower. Thank you very much, Vispi. Ryan, maybe I'll come back to you here. You offered up earlier a few more antidotes on helping the sales force in this COVID period adopt to the new normal. And then it also occurred to me, we didn't talk much in depth about the Gong platform itself. So maybe give a little more understanding of that platform, exactly, how it helps sales teams before we wrap up here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to make this a Gong commercial, but I think, like, historically, you haven't been able to capture your conversations in a way where you know what's going on across your business at scale. You can get on a few calls, you can do this, you can do that, but not know the entirety of the information flow that's going back and forth from your reps to your market and back and forth. That is wildly valuable, so much so that I think in 3 to 5 years we'll look back and be like, can you believe that our customer conversations were this huge black box that we didn't know anything, like we know so little about them, like crappy notes in a CRM and then maybe some anecdotes from the field. Like, that is not going to last the test of time, period. And I think that's part of the digital transformation that's going on right now. And you can harness the power of that for your business. Like, if you're going to have people at their terminal, they're going to be sitting there more often, and they're going to be doing this more often. There's a sea of valuable tools out there. And again, I'm not doing this for Vispi's sake, because this fits right into like why they exist and why they're valuable. But there are so many good tools out there, and I think, like, to not poke your head up and look at the broader sales tool landscape right now that is being formulated right before our eyes and being accelerated by what's happening with COVID. It's just crazy as to not engage this kind of like revolution that's going on right now. If you look at the marketing automation landscape, we all know it's crazy crowded. There's something like 5,000 to 7,000 players that are in the marketing automation landscape. It's ridiculous. When you look at the sales version of that, it is far less. It is far less. It's in the hundreds. It's around 300 to 500. And right now, there is a transformation of digital sales that's going on that is being, again, accelerated by the things that are going on with COVID. And there are some amazing tools. So I'd say that the last kind of categorical one is instrument your business.
I'll chime in here. I'll chime in here if that's okay. Yeah, there's some great data, and I know this anecdotally as well, is that everyone is surprised at how much on average more productive remote working has been. And I don't know if it's because millions of us worldwide hastened to set up the most awesome home office we could in the shortest period of time. I'm not sure what drove it, but all the research says that it's highly productive and more so than when you're in the office. So there is going to be a permanency that's left behind, even in 2021, that's going to stay. And it makes that instrumenting your systems using a variety of tools, all of them that are available, a more permanent thing.
So in this ever-changing environment, I'm curious to get both of your perspectives on what's a key trend that you're watching or you're keeping an eye on here in this ever-present changing environment. Vispi, I'm going to go to you first and get your perspective on key trends that you're watching, particularly around digital adoption or the broader ecosystem.
Yeah, in one word, I'd say automation. And let me explain that a little bit. So if you think of all the tasks we do on a daily basis during our workday, and think of some that are mundane and require no decision. So I'll give you a few examples. You're on your computer, you're navigating and clicking internally through an application or across browsers, etc. Those are all mundane and require no decision. Those should and can easily be automated. I'll give you a few more complex answers. Let's say you're in a software platform or an application and you want to navigate to 6 pages in order to get some data in a field. As a sales rep, I want to know what my pipeline looks like, and that it requires me to navigate 6 pages. All I need to do is read that field. So imagine if I could just instruct the application to navigate through that automatically in the back end without me seeing it and just retrieve for me my total pipeline, because that's the only decision I need to make. I'll give you one final example on automation is we're constantly filling forms in applications and the data is constantly repetitive. So imagine if one filled it at once and automatically a platform, a digital adoption platform like ours could be able to tell that this is where we should repeat that data entry throughout. Getting more done in less time. So automation.
Yeah, that sounds very much heading towards RPA, and I think digital adoption is kind of a close adjacency to that. As you learn processes and you walk folks through processes, automation is kind of the next step in that journey. If you can start to automate away a lot of those repetitive, let's say non-value added steps, that becomes a really interesting value proposition, I think, for digital adoption.
The one nuance.
Sorry, go ahead.
Really sorry, Don. The one nuance there is in digital adoption and automation, there's always a decision for an end user, whereas the entire process can't be automated. An end user does need to stop at a certain page or does need to provide input. So there's almost a conversation with that automation platform, unlike RPA, which is truly robotic. It just goes from start to finish. Just one nuance there.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. So thank you for the clarification. Brian, I'm going to ask you the same question. So what's one key trend on the sales front that you're keeping an eye on in your industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two that I mentioned previously are the biggest ones by far for me. So just as a recap, and I'll add one more that I think trails along with them. But one is, I think, the conversion of what's going on for field sellers right now. The art of field selling and what it has looked like has not changed for a long time. There's been changing at the margins, but there hasn't been a kind of like overhaul to that profession in a very long time. And I think a lot of the same things that make very successful field sellers historically will still be the things that make people successful going forward. But the medium and the mechanisms that we use to have that influence on our customers and prospects, I think that we're going to have to learn and adapt there. And I think I think this trend of like not getting on planes nearly as much and not relying nearly as much on those big kind of like in-person moments, absolutely here to stay. So I think that's number one that I mentioned previously. I think the opportunity that both kind of like technology in the world, as well as that very trend of instrumenting your business and having digital transformation specifically within the sales arena, I think is a very ripe opportunity for people to capitalize on right now. And so that's number two. And then number three that goes along with those first two is you can't just do these things without some enablement effort behind them. Like we need to be very, very thoughtful right now about what our enablement organizations look like. And, you know, I remember when I hired in my head of enablement, and I told her that she would continue to report to me directly for as long as I was at this company because I was so passionate about development. She nearly fell out of her chair. And it was one of those things where I was like, isn't everybody passionate about development in this way at this point? Because it's so central to running a top-notch organization. And whether it be enabling people to be successful in tools, or whether it be enabling them to be successful in a changing market environment that's like fundamentally changing so fast. I mean, COVID was a great example of this. So many organizations needed to rethink their value proposition, their pricing, the way they took things to market, just because of, I mean, not just because it's a big deal, but like COVID. So whether it be adapting to that really quickly, or whether it be this digital like broader digital transformation that's going on, and how to equip people to sell through means like WebEx or other ways. The development side of things is hugely important, tightly connected to those first two.
Great. Thank you so much, Ryan, for that insight. As we're rewinding down our time here, what's one key takeaway that each of you would want the folks from this panel to walk away with? Vispi, I'm going to start with you. What's the key takeaway if you could boil all that we've talked about here today down to one thing? What should people remember?
Yeah, I would add something new, to be honest, but very connected, which is digital transformation in general. And if you look at digital transformation, it's the process of using digital technologies to create new or modify existing business processes. And that continues unabated. In fact, that too gets magnified or amplified rather in a 2020 environment. So I would, the only thing I would conclude with is for C-suite, especially in IT, that digital transformation journey continues unabated, and make sure to adhere to that. And if you've paused that, continue that, because that's going to be a big driver to modernizing and making sure that your employees and your company is geared up for the future.
Great. Thank you so much, Vispi. Ryan, same question to you. What's the key takeaway that you want folks to walk away with today from your perspective?
Let's be honest, 2020 has been a crazy year so far. I think we'd all agree with that. And I think when you're faced with a lot of change, you know, you can either see that change as something that knocks you on your heels and you stay there and you're kind of playing defensive mode, or it can be an opportunity. And I think a lot of the things that are going on right now are going to accelerate trends that already existed. Now they're just coming faster. And each of those trends represents an opportunity for us if we have the right perspective and if we're willing to be agile and adaptive as organizations. And so the thing that I would say for business leaders and for professionals broadly is like, where is the opportunity in the change that you're experiencing in your day-to-day and in your business right now? Because change is here to stay, and adaptability for businesses is going to be the thing that allows some to adapt and win, and others to not adapt and not capitalize on any of the positives that are coming out from all of these trends. So it'd mostly be to step into that kind of mindset of being like, okay, where is the opportunity in this thing that I'm experiencing right now? And how can I double down in a way that's going to make my organization prosper coming out of this thing, even though it might not feel like an opportunity to start with?
Yeah, no, I think those are excellent points. Change is the only constant, as they say.
It's true.
And so
Yeah.
how you deal with that and, you know, finding the opportunity inside there is important. Well, thank you both. This was a great panel. Really appreciate the time and the pleasure to talk with you both. And I hope we can do this again sometime in the future.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Don.